Hi, my name's Phil. I like to talk about politics. In this video, I'd like to discuss one of the major objections that the House of Lords this week scrutinising Boris Johnson's withdrawal bill has with it. Namely that Johnson wants to abuse the rule of law by having ministers be able to tell judges what to do when interpreting the law. But first, if you'd like to receive notifications of daily news and political commentary, then please click the subscribe button and then the bell notification icon. So, since the general election and Boris Johnson's massive majority, he's been amending his own withdrawal bill like crazy. Bear in mind that the reason that this bill didn't go through last year is because Boris Johnson pulled it himself to stop amendments. He wanted it as it was. This is perfect, he said. Now he's changing it out of all recognition himself. The EU have already warned that if he changes it in a way that doesn't comply with the withdrawal agreement, which the bill is designed to implement, that it won't be supported and that we'll be leaving the EU on January the 31st, not into a transition period, but into the no-deal scenario. And on the issue of the courts, so the amendment being discussed by peers yesterday was a big one. They said that it was concerning that Johnson was seeking to not accept the jurisdiction of the ECJ on matters of EU law. And the legislation permits ministers to direct British judges, junior British judges as well, on the interpretation of those laws. And these concerns have not just been expressed by opposition peers, but by Conservative ones as well. The Lords Committee made it clear that only the Supreme Court and the Scottish High Court of the Judiciary have the power to depart from EU law interpretations, as the case is now, and that should be the case after as well. They said that allowing lower courts to interpret and reinterpret EU law would cause a lot of legal uncertainty that would be damaging to individuals and companies, they said. And that's the thing. Legal judgments have to be consistent. Sometimes you do get a bit of a grey area of the law. Oh, how does this apply in this scenario? And then you test it in the courts with senior experienced judges, and then it becomes clear because then you have a precedent. They say, this is what actually happens in this scenario. And then everyone goes, oh, right, okay, let's go along with that. That would no longer happen because ministers would be directing judges how to interpret those laws. And because their guidelines would change according to which interpretation was the most politically expedient at the time, nobody would ever have any idea what was going on. You could have a judgment in one scenario one day, and then a month later, in the same scenario, you could have a judge saying completely different things, being redirected by a minister to reinterpret it. And when the amendment was first proposed, unions were claiming that it would, amongst other things, allow corrupt bosses to strip protections away from the lowest paid workers, those already who have the crappiest, lot in life, who only get the bare minimum EU standard protections anyway. And yes, I know, given that a lot of those people indeed voted Conservatives, you'd say, well, that serves them right then. It's a little bit like the people of Poole, who yesterday heard that their A&E department, Accident and Emergency Department in their local hospital, is being closed down. The Health Secretary has just announced, we're going to close that down. And those silly beggars voted Tory. But not everyone hurt by this voted for them. Innocents will suffer too. And I said last week that I don't know which amendments the House of Lords would attach to this bill, but this was surely going to be the prime suspect. It's a part of the bill that is designed to give the government unchecked power. It's bad enough that this majority allows Boris Johnson to enact whatever laws he likes, without any proper scrutiny in the Commons at least. But this would allow him to dictate what that law actually means and change that interpretation on a daily basis, completely separate to Parliament. Completely separate to Parliament. That way lies chaos and madness. Imagine taking a job based on certain pay and conditions, only to find that it isn't those pay and conditions a few weeks later, that you've lost your rights that you thought were legally guaranteed. One peer said that if Boris Johnson's deal was as good as he says it is, then there's no need to give these lower courts powers to create grey areas in the law. And if the House of Lords does amend the bill along these lines, or any others, it'll happen next week because, it can't be pushed through the Lords as quickly as it has been through the Commons. And yes, for those keeping an eye on the calendar, we're supposed to be leaving on January the 31st, you'll be realising that Boris Johnson if he's faced with a bill that he now no longer wants because of those amendments, isn't going to have a lot of time to do anything about it. In fact, isn't going to have any time to do anything about it. So the situation is now as follows. So assuming that there is at least one amendment attached to this bill by the Lords, if Johnson does not accept the Lords' amendments, then we have no bill. It won't be enacted in law, because after it's gone through the Lords, it then has to go back to the Commons for a final okay, and then it goes off to be signed into law. So if that doesn't happen, we have no bill to legally leave the EU on January the 31st. But let's say the Lords do not amend the bill, but the EU Parliament decides that it does not comply with the agreement anymore, then they may refuse to ratify the deal as well. Now, if either of these events occurs, then Boris Johnson has two options. One, leave the EU without a deal, not forgetting to blame everyone else, of course. Or two, seek another extension in order to keep negotiating with whoever he is blaming for scuppering his plans. Obviously, the second is politically difficult for him. So, and he, the first one is the politically laziest one to go for, and he's a very politically lazy man. So the hope would be that the Lords do amend the bill to make sure that the EU are happy with it, and that Johnson accepts it. That the clauses that are changed that he desperately wants, he leaves until later. Because that's the thing, we do need to remember that an Act of Parliament is not set in stone. It can be amended at any point in the future by Parliament. And he can even force through changes through the Lords if he wants, if he's just willing to be patient. So I suspect that he will bluster a bit about any amendments, but otherwise accept them in order to, not derail his glorious Brexit at the end of this month, whether with or without bongs, and then plan to amend the bill later on if he really wants it. He has years after all. So I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. If you'd like to support the channel further, then please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.